Come, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. This is Unpopular Theology, episode 70. Today we're going to be talking about church history from about 36 AD to about 41 AD, so we're finally getting a few years under our belt here in this episode. Before we get started, go ahead and hit the like button, go ahead and subscribe, go over to our Facebook page, like us over there, post new content there every time we make a new video, and at the beginning of each month and at the end of each month. And with that being said, it's been a busy week. I don't think I've gotten to bed before 1 this week, just because of homework and whatnot. But there is good news. I will be having my district interview in about 2 weeks. So the episode on the 8th could very well be filmed in Minnesota. We'll see. So with that being said, honoring church history, this is Unpopular Theology. So where we left off last time was with the conversion of St. Paul and how Paul comes to Jerusalem and is eventually accepted by the church. Saul. He's still referred to as Saul at this point. We also left off with the healing of Aeneas. That's where we pick it up. So we'll start off with verse 36 of chapter 9 in Acts. Now, so there's this lady in Joppa named Dorcas, and Scripture says she is full of good works and acts of charity, and she passes away. And so the people in Joppa send for Peter, who just happens to be there when this happens, and they urge him to come, and Peter comes. And he finds them weeping, and they're showing him all these articles of clothing that Dorcas Tabitha is an alternate name for her. Tabitha is her Hebrew name, Dorcas is her Greek name. And they show him all the things that she's made for them. And so Peter sends them out. And he tells her in Hebrew, Tabitha, arise, and she opens her eyes, and when she sees Peter, she sits up, and because of this, the many people in Joppa believe. Now we get to probably one of the most interesting stories in the entire book of Acts, and that is Acts chapter 10. And it's the story of Peter and Cornelius. So we got to go into who Cornelius was. He is a centurion in the Italian cohort. So that means he's the commander of 100 men in a group of about 600. So he's a fairly well-ranked officer in the Roman army. And that also means that he's a Gentile. He's not Jewish. And he is listed as devout. And God sends an angel to him to send for Peter, who is still in Joppa at this point. And God basically tells Cornelius that this is because I've heard your prayers. And so, meanwhile, Peter is in Joppa. And it's at noon, and he goes up to pray. And he falls into some sort of trance. It's kind of one of the strangest stories in the Bible. And there's a great sheet that descends and let down by its four corners on the earth. And in this sheet, there are all kinds of animals, reptiles, and birds of the air. Keep in mind, Peter is still living under Jewish dietary law here. And we'll get to that in a few minutes here, what that is. And there's a voice that tells him, and it's in red letters, so we're guessing Jesus. And it says, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter, of course, is shocked by this. Absolutely shocked. And he tells Christ that by no means have I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice comes back a second time and says, what God has made clean, do not common. And this happens 3 times. Good old St. Peter. It takes him a while to learn sometimes. And so now we get into the divisions of the law, because this is a very significant part to really understand this story. So there are 3 divisions of the law in the Old Testament. There is the moral law. When I think of the law, that's what I think of. It's the 10 Commandments, and it still applies. It is still very much, killing is still very much a sin, but remember that our transgressions against this law are atoned for on the cross. Then this is then there's the civil law. The example I have is stoning of disobedient children. Most of Leviticus, in fact. And that law does not apply today. Christ has fulfilled it. That law, the theonomists, which are a group of people today who believe that America should be governed by ancient Israelite law. No, they need to understand that this law was meant for Israel at that point in time, and that once the nation of Israel was captured, that law no longer applies. Then there's the ceremonial law, and that's really what we're dealing with here in Acts chapter 10. So the example of this is the dietary laws, so no pork, no shellfish, no whatever or not. And there's some aspects of it where it's like, this is kind of a health code, but there are other aspects where it's like, this is to set the Jews apart. And Christ fulfills this law. And that's the main thing here, is that Christ has fulfilled this law. And this also will play in another role here, because as the 3rd vision is wrapping up, Cornelius's men show up, and the angel sends Peter with them. So if you're not seeing the object lesson here, the Lord is telling Peter not to call common what he has made clean. So that is the people, that is the animals that the Lord has made, don't call them common. And if that's the case, how much more do you consider a man who is made in the image of God to be considered common? So Peter goes there. Cornelius invites a few of his friends there, and Peter reminds him of the ceremonial law in verse 28 and tells him Jews aren't supposed to be in Gentiles' homes. And Cornelius tells the story about what happened to him, and Peter preaches the gospel to him. And this is the first time that it's recorded that a Gentile truly hears the gospel. And this fulfills the Great Commission, where Christ says that we will be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and to the ends of the earth. This is starting to fulfill that by going out from Jerusalem, Judea, to Samaria, out from there and going to the ends of the earth, starting with Cornelius. And these men believe and receive baptism. Men, women, and children. Of course, there's the fact that it doesn't say that it was everybody but the infants. It says all of them were. So from there, Peter goes to Jerusalem, and there he catches heat from the circumcision party. Basically, these people who sit there and say that in order to be saved, you must be circumcised. Later on in the 1st century, we're going to know these people as Judaizers. And he gives a report of the events with Cornelius. And the minds of the Judaizers / circumcision party who are there seem to change. And they accept this as a good thing. And yeah, we can go a little bit further here. So, After the church is scattered, keep in mind this is still around 36 AD when they're scattered. Now it's about 41. People start going to Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, and they start speaking. They don't speak to anyone except Jews. And some of the men of Cyprus and Cyrene who come to Antioch start speaking to the Greeks about Christ. And God is with them, it says in this. And there are many who turn to the Lord. And this comes to the knowledge of the church at Jerusalem. And so they send Barnabas up to Antioch. And he sees the grace of God, and he exhorts them all to remain faithful to the Lord. And so then Barnabas goes to Tarshish to look for Saul, who I guess has gone back to his hometown. And when he finds him, he brings him to Antioch, and they stay there for a whole year, and they teach a lot of people. And then this is a very key moment in church history. Acts chapter 26, chapter 11, verse 26b. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. It means little Christs. It's kind of a derogatory term. Of course, we embrace it eventually. And prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. There's one named Agabus, stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there would be a great famine over the world. This took place in the days of Claudius. So the disciples determined everyone according to his ability to send relief to the brothers living in Judea, and they did so, sending it to the elders by the hand of Barnabas and Saul. So yeah, that's quite a lot to cover. And that pretty much wraps it up for this week. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the office of the ministry, what it is not. Of course, I'm going to be talking about some false views in the ministry. That should be fun. So until next week, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus.